Welcome to the world behind midnight, where darkness reveals truths that daylight hides. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and prepare yourself for what comes next. They told him it was just an animal, a rogue predator terrorizing a forgotten valley in the Cascade Mountains. Staff Sergeant Sageberger was the best marksman the military had ever produced. But when you hunt something that hunts back, when you stalk prey that thinks like a soldier, the question becomes simple. Who is the hunter, and who is the bait? The encrypted message arrived at 0300 hours on a Tuesday that felt like the end of something. Staff Sergeant Sageberger sat in his barracks apartment, the glow of his laptop the only light in the darkness. The subject line was clinical, sterile, asset termination protocol, Whisper Valley. He clicked it open, and his world shifted on its axis. The classified briefing was sparse, deliberately vague in that way that made his instincts scream. Teratological entity detected. Apex class threat. Location, Whisper Valley, Washington. 3 confirmed fatalities, including local sheriff and 2 state park rangers. Civilian population evacuated. Your presence is requested immediately. Sage had been a sniper for 12 years. He had taken shots from rooftops in Fallujah, from mountainsides in the Hindu Kush, from the deck of a rolling ship in the Gulf of Aden. He had eliminated targets at distances that defied belief, threading rounds through windows the size of dinner plates at over a mile. He was a ghost, a shadow, a whisper of death that enemies never saw coming. But this was different. The language was wrong. Teratological entity, not hostile combatant, not insurgent, entity. As if the thing they wanted him to kill existed outside the normal taxonomy of war. He scrolled through the attached files. The crime scene photos loaded slowly, each pixel revealing a new level of horror. The bodies, what remained of them, were scattered across a forest clearing like broken dolls. The sheriff's cruiser was overturned, its roof caved in from above, as if something massive had landed on it. The metal was warped, twisted, bearing claw marks that were too deep, too deliberate. The sheriff himself had been found, 30 feet up, in a Douglas fir, impaled on a broken branch, his service weapon empty, his face locked in an expression of terminal disbelief. The next image showed the Rangers. Or rather, it showed pieces. An arm here, a leg there, a torso that had been opened with surgical precision. There was no blood spatter pattern that made sense, no defensive wounds. It was as if they had been taken apart by something that understood anatomy, that knew exactly where to cut, where to tear, to maximize damage and minimize the victim's ability to fight back. Sage had seen what IEDs did to human bodies. He had seen what high-caliber rounds did to flesh and bone. This was different. This was personal. A video file was embedded at the bottom of the briefing. He hesitated, then clicked play. It was dashcam footage from the sheriff's vehicle, time-stamped 3 days ago. The image was grainy, washed out by the vehicle's headlights cutting through darkness and rain. The sheriff was driving slowly down a logging road, his radio crackling with static. Then the vehicle lurched to a stop. The headlights illuminated something in the road ahead. At first it looked like a bear, massive and dark, standing on its hind legs. But bears didn't stand like that. They didn't move with that kind of fluid, predatory grace. The creature turned toward the camera, and for just a fraction of a second, the headlights caught its eyes. They glowed, reflecting the light with an unnatural amber brilliance. And then it charged. The speed was impossible, a blur of motion that closed the distance in seconds. The sheriff's scream was cut short by the sound of metal tearing, glass shattering, and then the camera feed went to static. Sage replayed it 3 times, pausing on that single frame where the eyes glowed in the darkness. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just an animal. Animals didn't charge police vehicles. They didn't hunt armed men with that kind of calculated aggression. The final document in the briefing was a personnel file. Project designation, Lycaon. The name sent a chill down his spine. Lycaon, the ancient Greek king transformed into a wolf, as punishment by the gods. But this wasn't mythology. This was a file with redacted sections, blacked out paragraphs that spoke of classified experiments and words like bioweapon enhancement and genetic modification, and at the bottom, a single line that made his blood run cold. Subject 0 escaped containment 47 days ago. Last known vector Whisper Valley Wildlife Corridor. He closed the laptop, his hands steady, despite the implications crashing through his mind. This wasn't a hunt. This was a cleanup operation. They had made something, lost control of it, and now they needed it erased. And they had chosen him because he was the best, or because he was expendable. The line between the two had always been blurrier than anyone wanted to admit. He packed his gear with the methodical precision of ritual. The M40A5 sniper rifle, broken down into its component parts, nestled in foam-lined case. Each piece was a work of art, machined to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. He assembled his ammunition next, selecting rounds with silver-tipped cores. The briefing had been specific about that. Silver, as if they were hunting something out of folklore. His tactical vest came next, loaded with magazines for his sidearm. A Glock 22 that had saved his life more times than he could count. He added a combat knife, a flashlight with a strobing function, road flares, and a small emergency radio. Finally, he packed something he had sworn he would never need again. A satellite phone with a direct encrypted line to a number he had been given after his last deployment, after the incident in the Syrian desert that nobody talked about. The number you called when the mission went sideways, when the enemy turned out to be something the textbooks had no answer for. 12 hours later, he was there. Whisper Valley was a wound in the earth, a deep glacial cut between mountains that rose like ancient sentinels. The town itself, if you could call it that, was a scattering of abandoned buildings clustered around a single main road that ended at a locked Forest Service gate. The evacuation had been thorough. Windows were boarded, doors were chained shut. A hand-painted sign on the general store read, "Closed until further notice," as if the residents expected to come back, as if normalcy was just a matter of time. Sage set up his base of operations in an old fire lookout tower on the valley's eastern ridge. It was perfect. 120 feet of elevation, 360-degree views, and a small enclosed cabin at the top that had been designed to withstand the worst the mountains could throw at it. He spent the first afternoon fortifying his position, running steel cable from the tower's supports to nearby trees, creating a web of early warning lines that would vibrate if anything large moved through them. He mounted motion-activated trail cameras at strategic points on the approaches, their infrared sensors programmed to capture anything that moved. Inside the cabin, he set up his rifle. The M40A5 was a precision instrument, and he treated it with the reverence of a priest tending an altar. He mounted the Schmidt and Bender scope, a piece of German engineering that could resolve a target's features at 1,500 meters. He calibrated it against known distances, using a distant boulder and a lone tree as reference points. He logged the wind speed, the temperature, the humidity. Every variable mattered. Every detail could mean the difference between a kill and a miss. As the sun set, painting the valley in shades of blood and shadow, Sage settled into his chair and began his watch. He scanned the terrain below through the scope, mapping the landscape in his mind. The town was a grid of intersecting streets, easy to navigate, easy to predict. The forest beyond was denser, a labyrinth of pine and fir that could hide an army. The river that cut through the valley was a silver ribbon in the fading light, its banks choked with undergrowth and fallen timber. If he were the hunted, that's where he would hide. In the deep places, where the light didn't reach. The night came on fast, as it always did in the mountains. One moment the sky was purple and orange, the next it was black and star-filled. Sage switched to his thermal scope, the world transforming into a landscape of heat signatures. He saw the warm glow of a deer moving through the trees to the north. A family of raccoons scavenging near the river. The faint heat bloom of an owl perched on a dead branch, waiting for prey. Everything was normal. Everything was as it should be. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. At 2300 hours, the first camera triggered. Sage's tablet chimed softly, displaying a grainy infrared image. Something large had passed in front of camera 3. positioned near the old sawmill on the valley's western edge. He zoomed in, enhancing the image. The shape was indistinct, a blur of motion that suggested size and speed, but revealed no details. It could have been a bear, it could have been an elk, or it could have been something else. He noted the time and location in his log, then resumed his scan. The second trigger came an hour later, camera 7, on the opposite side of the valley near the abandoned schoolhouse. The same blur, the same impossible speed. It was moving in a pattern, circling the town, testing the perimeter. Sage felt the first cold finger of unease trace down his spine. This was reconnaissance. This was an intelligence gathering. Whatever was out there, it knew he was here, and it was studying him, learning his position, his capabilities, his weaknesses. The predator had found its prey. Now it was deciding how to strike. He spent the rest of the night motionless, his eye pressed to the scope, his finger resting near the trigger. The valley below was a theater of shadows, every dark space a potential threat, every movement a possible target. But the creature, if it was out there, stayed hidden. It was playing the long game, and Sage realized with a sick certainty that he was no longer the hunter. He was a piece on a board, and his opponent was several moves ahead. Dawn came like a reprieve, the light chasing away the shadows and revealing the valley in stark, unforgiving detail. Sage allowed himself a brief rest, heating a ration pack on a small camp stove, forcing himself to eat, even though his stomach was a knot of tension. He checked his cameras, reviewing the night's footage frame by frame. There were 17 separate triggers, scattered across the valley in a pattern that made no sense unless you understood what you were looking at. A perimeter sweep, a tactical assessment. This thing, whatever it was, had circled his position multiple times, staying just out of range, learning his blind spots. The radio crackled to life, startling him. A voice, distorted by encryption and distance, spoke with the flat affect of a career bureaucrat, whispered a base, report status. Sage picked up the handset, his voice equally emotionless. Base, this is Whisper. Position established. No contact with primary target. Multiple probable sightings on peripheral surveillance. Target is demonstrating advanced evasion and reconnaissance behavior. There was a pause, a hiss of static. Acknowledged. Whisper. Maintain observation. Do not engage unless you have a guaranteed kill shot. This asset is priority termination. No capture protocols in effect. The line went dead. No questions about his safety. No concern for his tactical disadvantage. Just the mission. Terminate the asset. Sage set the radio down, his jaw tight. He was alone out here, cut off from support, facing an enemy that was smart enough to avoid him and patient enough to wait for a mistake. He had to change the dynamic. He had to draw it out, force it to make a move. And he had an idea, a dangerous, possibly suicidal idea. But it was better than sitting in the tower and waiting to be outmaneuvered. He spent the afternoon preparing. He retrieved a 5-gallon can of diesel fuel from the abandoned gas station in town, along with a length of chain and a rusted metal barrel. He hauled it all to the center of town, to the intersection of Main Street and Elk Avenue, directly in the most open, exposed position he could find. He filled the barrel with diesel, soaking the chain in the fuel before draping it over the rim. Then, he set up a timer, a simple mechanical device salvaged from an old generator, rigged to ignite a road flare that would drop into the barrel at a predetermined time. A bonfire, visible for miles, impossible to ignore. As the sun began its descent, Sage climbed back to his tower and settled in behind his rifle. The timer was set for 2100 hours, 3 hours after full dark. He would have the advantage of night vision. The creature would be drawn to the light, curious or enraged. It didn't matter. It would show itself, and he would take the shot. 1 round. Center mass, silver-tipped and moving, at 2800 feet per second. Even if it was armored, even if it was unnaturally tough, the kinetic energy would be catastrophic. The night fell, and with it came a silence so complete, it felt like the world was holding its breath. Sage scanned the valley, his thermal scope revealing nothing but the usual nocturnal animals going about their business. At exactly 2100 hours, the timer clicked. There was a brief spark, a hiss, and then the barrel erupted into flames. The diesel burned hot and bright, a pillar of fire that turned night into day for a 100-yard radius. The light danced across the empty buildings, casting grotesque, elongated shadows that writhed and twisted. Sage waited, his breathing slow and controlled, his heartbeat steady. Minutes passed. Then, at the edge of the light, something moved. It emerged from the shadows between the old hardware store and the post office, a shape that was massive and wrong. It walked on two legs, but its posture was hunched, predatory, its arms too long, its movements too fluid. The firelight caught its fur, revealing a coat of mottled gray and black that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, and its eyes, even from this distance, glowed with that same amber brilliance he had seen in the dashcam video. It approached the fire slowly, cautiously, its head swiveling as if it were scanning the surrounding darkness for threats. Sage's crosshairs settled on its chest, tracking its movement. The rangefinder displayed 1230 meters, an easy shot. He adjusted for the slight crosswind, exhaled slowly, and began to squeeze the trigger. And then the creature did something that made his blood freeze. It looked directly at him, not toward the tower in general, at him, specifically, as if it could see through the darkness, through the walls of the cabin, directly into his soul. It raised one clawed hand, almost in a gesture of acknowledgement, and then it stepped backward into the shadows and vanished. Sage held his position, his finger still on the trigger, his mind racing. It knew exactly where he was. It knew what he was planning, and it had shown itself deliberately, just long enough to deliver a message. I see you. I know what you are, and you can't touch me. The fire continued to burn, casting its futile light into the empty night. Sage lowered his rifle, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. This wasn't going to be a hunt. This was going to be a war. The fire burned itself out by midnight, leaving only a smoldering wreck of twisted metal and ash. Sage didn't sleep. He couldn't. Every shadow that moved, every branch that creaked in the wind, sent a jolt of adrenaline through his system. The creature had shown itself, proven it could appear and disappear at will, and then melted back into the darkness. He had lost the initiative. Worse, he had revealed his capabilities, his position, his tactics. And in return, he had learned nothing except that his opponent was far smarter than anyone had anticipated. At 0400 hours, he made a decision. Staying in the tower was suicide. The high ground was an advantage only if your enemy couldn't simply wait you out, starve you out, or find a way to climb up and finish you in close quarters. He needed to go mobile. He needed to take the fight to the creature, find its lair, and eliminate it on its own ground. It was insane. It violated every principle of long-range engagement. But sitting still was death, and Sageburger had not survived 12 years of war by playing it safe. He packed light. The M40A5 stayed behind, too cumbersome for close quarters work. He took his Glock, 4 spare magazines loaded with the silver-tipped rounds, his combat knife, a tactical flashlight, the emergency flares, and the satellite phone. He also took something he had found in the general store during his initial recon, a battery-powered police scanner. It was old, analog, probably useless, but he clipped it to his belt anyway. Every tool was a potential advantage. Every advantage, a potential lifeline. The descent from the tower was nerve-wracking. Every step on the metal ladder rang out in the silence like a bell. He expected an attack with every rung, imagined claws reaching out of the darkness to drag him down, but nothing came. He reached the ground, pressed his back against the tower's support beam, and scanned the forest with his flashlight. Nothing, just trees and darkness and the distant sound of the river. He moved toward the town, keeping to the shadows, his Glock drawn and ready. The town at ground level was a different beast entirely. From the tower, it had seemed small, manageable, a neat grid of streets and buildings. Down here, It was a labyrinth of blind corners and hidden alcoves. Every doorway was a potential ambush point, every alley a death trap. He moved slowly, methodically, checking his corners, pausing to listen. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft crunch of gravel under his boots and the distant hoot of an owl. He made his way to the sheriff's station, a squat brick building at the edge of town. The door had been torn off its hinges, the frame splintered like kindling. Inside, the place was chaos. Desks overturned, filing cabinets ripped open, papers scattered across the floor. There was blood here, dark stains on the walls and ceiling that spoke of violence, sudden and brutal. Sage moved through the wreckage, his light playing across the destruction. He was looking for something, anything, that might give him an edge. A map, a logbook, evidence of where the attacks had started. He found it in the back office, pinned to a corkboard that had somehow survived the carnage. A hand-drawn map of the valley, annotated with dates and locations. The first attack, 43 days ago, had been a hunting cabin 5 miles north of town. The hunter, a local man named Thomas Wade, had been found dismembered in his sleeping bag. The second attack, a week later, had been a camper on the river's edge. Then, another hunter. Then the first ranger. The pattern was clear. The creature was moving south, following the river, systematically eliminating anyone who entered its territory. But there was something else. Someone had drawn a circle in red marker around a spot deep in the forest, miles from any trail or road. Next to it, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Den, large tracks. Scat analysis inconclusive. Do not approach." Sage stared at the map, his mind calculating distances and terrain. If the creature had a den, a home base, that was where he needed to go. That was where it would be vulnerable. He pulled out his own map, compared the two, and marked the coordinates. It was a 3-hour hike through rough country. He would go at first light. As he turned to leave, the police scanner on his belt crackled to life. Static at first, then a voice, garbled and breaking up, but unmistakably human. "Anyone, copy. This is Ranger Station 7. If anyone can hear this, it's still out there. It's watching me right now." Sage froze. Ranger Station 7. He pulled up his map. It was a remote outpost on the valley's northern edge, marked as abandoned on all official documents. But someone was there. Someone was alive, and they were in immediate danger. He keyed the scanner's transmit button, not sure if it would even work. "Station 7, this is Whisper. I read you. What is your status?" There was a long pause, filled with static and what sounded like heavy breathing. Then the voice came back, male, young, terrified. "Whisper. Who are you? Are you military?" Sage felt a surge of relief, mixed with dread. A survivor, a witness, possibly an ally, or possibly bait. "Affirmative, Station 7. I am military. What is your situation?" The response was strained, barely a whisper. "My name is Kyle Mercer. I'm a graduate student. Wildlife biology. I was up here studying wolf reintroduction patterns when the evacuation order came through. I tried to leave, but my truck, something tore it apart. I've been holed up here for 6 days. It comes every night. It circles the building. It knows I'm here. It's playing with me." Sage's jaw tightened. 6 days. This kid had survived 6 days in the same valley where 3 armed men had been slaughtered in hours. That took either incredible luck or incredible skill. "Stay inside. Barricade the doors and windows. I'm coming to you. ETA, 3 hours. Can you hold that long?" There was a sound in the background, a heavy thud against wood, like something massive striking a wall. Kyle's voice rose in panic. "It's here. It's at the door. Oh God, it's trying to get in. Whisper, please. I don't want to die. I don't want to." The transmission dissolved into static, then screams, then silence. Sage stood in the ruined sheriff's station, the scanner dead in his hand. He had a choice. He could stick to his plan, head for the den, try to eliminate the creature in its lair, or he could go north, to Station 7, and try to save a life. The tactical part of his brain said the den was the smart play. The human part of his brain said otherwise. He chose human. He holstered his Glock and started running. The forest at night was a hostile, alien world. The trees rose like cathedral pillars, their canopy so dense it blotted out the stars. Sage's flashlight cut a narrow cone of white through the darkness, revealing gnarled roots and moss-covered rocks that threatened to trip him with every step. He ran at a controlled pace, fast enough to cover ground, but slow enough to avoid a twisted ankle or a headlong plunge into a ravine. The 3-hour estimate assumed a walking pace. He intended to cut that in half. The terrain fought him. The valley floor gave way to steep hillsides choked with underbrush. He clambered over fallen logs, waded through streams that soaked him to the waist, pushed through thickets of thorns that tore at his clothes and skin. His breathing was controlled, his focus absolute. He had done forced marches in the desert, carrying 80 pounds of gear. This was nothing. This was survival. And somewhere ahead, a terrified kid was counting on him to arrive before the monster did. He was halfway there when he found the first body. It was hanging from a tree, suspended 15 feet in the air, by what looked like its own intestines, wrapped around a thick branch. The corpse was fresh, maybe a day old, the face locked in a rictus of agony. Sage recognized the uniform. State Park Ranger, one of the two who had been reported as casualties. The creature hadn't just killed him. It had strung him up as a warning, a signpost marking the boundary of its territory. A message written in flesh and blood. Turn back. This is my land now. Sage forced himself to move on. The forest grew denser, the silence more profound. He was deep in the creature's domain now, far from any road or trail. This was wilderness, raw and primal, the kind of place where humans were no longer apex predators. He could feel it, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck, the unmistakable awareness of being watched. He swept his flashlight in wide arcs, searching the darkness for movement. Nothing, just shadows and trees and the endless, oppressive quiet. Ranger Station 7 appeared suddenly, a squat log cabin nestled in a small clearing. The windows were dark, the door intact. Sage approached cautiously, his Glock raised, his finger on the trigger. Kyle, its whisper, I'm outside. I'm coming in. No response. He tried the door. It was unlocked. He pushed it open slowly, his flashlight preceding him into the darkness. The interior was a shambles. Furniture overturned, papers scattered, claw marks gouged deep into the wooden walls. But there was no blood, no body. No sign of Kyle Mercer. He swept the room, clearing each corner, checking the small back bedroom and the supply closet. Empty. The radio equipment on the desk was smashed, its components scattered across the floor. Sage picked up a piece, examining it in his light. The damage was fresh, the plastic still sharp at the edges. This had happened within the hour. He set the piece down and noticed something else. Boot prints in the dust. Small, consistent with a young man of average build. And they led to the back window, which was open, its screen torn out. Sage moved to the window, shining his light outside. The prints continued into the forest, disappearing into the underbrush. Kyle had run, or been chased, or lured. Sage climbed through the window, dropping into the soft earth below. The tracks were easy to follow, too easy. They led in a straight line away from the cabin. No attempt at evasion, no zigzagging or doubling back. Someone running in panic, or someone being herded. He followed them for 20 minutes, the forest growing darker and more oppressive with each step. The tracks led downhill, toward the sound of rushing water, the river, and then the tracks stopped. Sage swept his light across the ground. Nothing. The prints simply ended, mid-stride, as if Kyle had been plucked out of existence. He looked up, scanning the trees. Nothing. He looked down, examining the earth more closely, and then he saw it. A single drop of blood, fresh and dark, glistening in the beam of his flashlight. A sound behind him. A soft, almost imperceptible rustle of leaves. Sage spun, his Glock coming up, his light stabbing into the darkness. and there it was. The creature. It stood 20 feet away, partially obscured by a massive fir tree, its amber eyes glowing in the reflected light. It was even larger up close, easily 7 feet tall, its body a grotesque fusion of human and wolf. Its fur was matted and scarred, its claws black and curved like scythes, and in its hand, dangling limply, was Kyle Mercer. The kid's eyes were open, staring at nothing, his throat a ragged ruin. Sage didn't hesitate. He fired. 3 shots, center mass, the reports deafening in the confined space of the forest. The creature staggered, dropping Kyle's body, its roar of pain and rage shaking the trees, but it didn't fall. It charged. Sage threw himself sideways, the creature's swipe missing him by inches, the force of it splintering the tree trunk behind him. He rolled, came up firing, 2 more shots striking its shoulder and neck. It howled again, a sound that was part animal, part something far more terrible, and then it turned and fled, crashing through the underbrush with impossible speed. Sage didn't pursue. He stood there, his Glock smoking, his heart hammering, staring at the spot where the creature had disappeared. He had hit it 5 times, center mass and vital areas, and it had run, not died, not even slowed significantly, just run. He looked down at Kyle's body, the kid's lifeless eyes reflecting the beam of his flashlight. He had been too late. The rescue had been a trap, bait to draw him out, to test his capabilities, and he had walked right into it. He knelt beside Kyle, closing the kid's eyes with a shaking hand. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words were inadequate, hollow, but they were all he had. He stood, took one last look at the forest where the creature had vanished, and began the long walk back to town. The hunt had just become personal. Sage made it back to Whisper Valley as dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire and ash. He was exhausted, soaked in sweat and river water, his clothes torn and bloodied from a dozen minor cuts and scrapes. But he was alive, and that meant he still had a chance. He climbed back to the tower, his movements mechanical, driven by muscle memory rather than conscious thought. Inside the cabin, he collapsed into his chair, his body finally giving in to the accumulated fatigue and adrenaline crash. He allowed himself 10 minutes. 10 minutes to close his eyes, to breathe, to let his mind process what had happened. He had shot the creature 5 times with ammunition specifically designed to kill it, and it had barely noticed. Either the intel about Silver was wrong, or this thing was far more resilient than anyone had anticipated. He thought about Kyle Mercer, the terrified kid who had survived 6 days alone, only to be used as bait in a predator's game. The creature hadn't killed him immediately. It had kept him alive, broadcasting his distress, knowing someone would come. It was using human psychology as a weapon, exploiting empathy and duty to lure its real target into the open. Sage sat up, forcing his tired mind to focus. He needed a new plan. Conventional tactics weren't working. The creature was too smart, too fast, too durable. He needed to think outside the box, to find an asymmetric advantage. He pulled out his satellite phone and dialed the emergency number. It rang 3 times before a voice answered, cold and professional. "Whisper. Report." Sage took a deep breath. I engaged the target. Direct contact, 5 rounds, center mass and vitals. No termination. Target is demonstrating extreme resilience to small arms fire. Recommend immediate extraction and revaluation of termination protocols. There was a long silence on the other end. Then the voice came back, colder than before. "Negative. Whisper. Extraction is not authorized. You are to maintain pursuit and neutralize the target by any means necessary. Additional assets are not available. This is your mission. Complete it." The line went dead. Sage stared at the phone, a sick realization settling in his guts. They weren't going to help him. They weren't going to send backup. He was alone out here, facing an unkillable monster, and his own command structure had just written him off. He was expendable. The mission was all that mattered. He set the phone down and stood, walking to the window. The valley spread out below him, peaceful and serene in the morning light. From up here, you couldn't see the blood, the destruction, the bodies. It looked like paradise. But Sage knew better. Paradise had been corrupted. Something unnatural had taken root here, and it was his job to burn it out. He just had to figure out how. He spent the morning reviewing everything he knew. The creature was a product of Project Lycaon, some kind of genetic experiment that had escaped containment. It was intelligent, tactical, and nearly indestructible. But it had to have weaknesses. Everything did. He pulled out his tablet and accessed the classified files again, this time reading more carefully. Most of it was redacted, black lines obscuring the details. But there were fragments, breadcrumbs of information, gene splicing, accelerated healing, enhanced musculature, neurological augmentation, and then, buried deep in a subsection about containment protocols, a single line that made him sit up straight. Subject 0 exhibits extreme photosensitivity under prolonged UV exposure. Avoid direct sunlight during transport. Photosensitivity. The creature was vulnerable to light. Not just any light, but sunlight. UV radiation. That's why it hunted at night. That's why it retreated into the shadows when he had set the bonfire. It wasn't avoiding the light for tactical reasons. It was avoiding it because it hurt. Sage felt a grim smile tug at the corner of his mouth. He had his asymmetric advantage. Now, he just needed to weaponize it. He spent the rest of the day preparing. He raided every abandoned building in town, collecting every source of UV light he could find. Tanning lamps from the old salon, grow lights from a shuttered greenhouse, black lights from the high school theater. He hauled them all back to the town square, wiring them together into a makeshift array, powered by a portable generator he found in the hardware store. By nightfall, he had created a kill zone. The entire intersection of Main Street and Elk Avenue was bathed in overlapping cones of UV light, 100 feet of brilliance that would sear the creature's enhanced eyes and skin. He positioned himself on the roof of the general store, a high vantage point with clear sightlines and multiple escape routes. His Glock was loaded and ready. But this time, he had a backup plan. Strapped to his vest were 4 road flares and a canister of white phosphorus he had found in the ranger station's emergency supplies. If bullets wouldn't kill it, fire might. He activated the generator at 2000 hours. The UV lights blazed to life, turning the town square into an alien landscape of purple-white brilliance. It was harsh, almost painful to look at, even for him. For the creature, it would be agony. Now, all he had to do was wait, and he didn't have to wait long. At 21:30, the motion sensors around the perimeter triggered in sequence. The creature was coming, moving fast, drawn by the light, or by the challenge, or by simple predatory instinct. Sage watched through his scope, his breathing slow and controlled, and then it burst into the square, moving at full speed, a blur of fur and muscle and rage. The moment it hit the UV field, it screamed. Not a roar, a scream high-pitched and agonized, the sound of something in genuine pain. Its fur began to smoke, thin wisps of gray rising from its body. It staggered, pawing at its eyes, disoriented and desperate. Sage didn't give it time to recover. He opened fire, emptying his magazine into its chest and head. The silver-tipped round struck home, punching through flesh and bone with wet, meaty thuds. The creature fell to its knees, still screaming, its body convulsing, but it wasn't dead. Even now, with a dozen bullets in it, and its skin burning under the UV assault, it was trying to crawl toward the shadows. Sage reloaded, his movements automatic, and prepared to fire again. But then he saw something that made him pause. The creature's wounds were healing, not quickly, but visibly. The bullet holes in its chest were closing, the torn flesh knitting itself back together. It was regenerating, even under the UV bombardment. He had hurt it, maybe even mortally wounded it, but it was fighting back with a biology that defied everything he understood about life and death. He needed to end this, now. He pulled the white phosphorus canister from his vest, armed it, and threw. The canister arced through the air, tumbling end over end, and landed directly in front of the creature. It detonated with a brilliant flash, and suddenly the square was filled with a different kind of light. White phosphorus burned at 30,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt steel, to ignite human flesh like paper. The creature shrieked, engulfed in a pillar of chemical fire that clung to its fur and skin, burning with an intensity that turned night into day. It thrashed, rolling, trying desperately to extinguish the flames. But white phosphorus doesn't go out. It burns until there's nothing left to burn. Sage watched, his face impassive, as the creature's movements became slower, weaker, its screams fading into wet, gurgling gasps. And then, finally, it went still. The fire continued to burn, consuming the body, reducing it to ash and charred bone. The smell was indescribable, a mix of burning hair and cooking meat and something chemical and wrong. Sage stood on the roof, the UV light still blazing, and watched the creature die. He felt nothing. No triumph, no relief, just a cold, empty exhaustion. The mission was complete. The asset was terminated. He had done his job. He climbed down from the roof, approached the smoldering remains, and confirmed the kill. There wasn't much left, just blackened bones and a few fragments of melted metal embedded in the ash. Dog tags. He picked one up, brushing off the soot. The engraving was still legible. Project Lycaon, Subject 0, Test Batch, Alpha 7, and beneath that, a name. Dr. Sarah Keene, Project Lead. Sage stared at the tag, his mind working through the implications. This thing, this monster, it had been someone. A volunteer, a soldier, a person who had been transformed into a weapon and then discarded when the experiment went wrong. He pocketed the tag and pulled out his satellite phone. Time to call it in. Time to end this nightmare. But as his finger hovered over the call button, he heard something. A sound from the forest, faint but unmistakable. A howl, long and mournful, and filled with a rage that transcended species. And then, another, and another. 3 separate voices, calling out in the darkness, answering the death of their kin. Sage's blood went cold. Subject 0. The designation implied others. He had killed the first, but there were more, and now they knew he was here. He looked down at the charred remains at his feet, then back toward the forest, where the howls were growing louder, closer. The mission wasn't over. It had just begun, and this time, he was the one being hunted. He grabbed his gear, extinguished the lights, and disappeared into the night. Behind him, the howls echoed through Whisper Valley, a promise of vengeance written in sound and fury. The hunter had become the hunted, and the real nightmare was only just beginning. The darkness never stops hunting. If you want to survive what comes next, subscribe to The World Behind Midnight, because some stories don't end when the lights come back on. They're just waiting for you to turn them off again.